Hello. My name is Artemis_anime, and today I am reading A Robin's Nest by SilvermistAnimeLover. Chapter 10. Chapter 10. Revenge. Author's note. Hello everyone! It's been, 9 months since I updated this story. I'm so sorry! And I also feel bad that this chapter's only 5k words or so long, but at least it's a chapter? Sports Festival should be next. Sorry for such a long wait, but happy holidays! I wanted to get this out for Christmas to make everyone smile. Did you smile? I hope so. I also added some edits to the previous chapter, but I'll post those at a later date because uploading even just one chapter takes me the better part of an hour. No joke. No, seriously. She's not in this chapter. Lol. At any rate, I wanted to thank everyone who submitted epic fan art. I loved it all. I got so excited every time I see new art. I've compiled it all into one link, so please enjoy, smiley face. And if anyone has new fan art to send me, please email it to aizawa@email.com along with the username you'd like to go by. And then it has a link to A Robin's Nest fan art and igamura.com galleries. Twice. That being said, please enjoy this chapter. Warnings, depictions of abuse. Izuku smirked as he laid in his bed. Hisashi was a little smarter than he'd given him credit for. The man hadn't laid a finger on him, and instead sent him to his room. He'd locked the door from the outside, switching the door handle for the one that Izuku couldn't pick the lock of. No food, of course, and no water. But Izuku had been counting on this. He'd stocked up on years of evidence against the man. Videos, audio, photos, written threats, and everything he could get his hand on. He'd even recorded that one day he'd revealed he wasn't Izuku's biological father. Hisashi was smart enough to know that giving Izuku bruises when he attended UA was a bad idea, but the man had underestimated Izuku's ability to make connections. He knew Izuku was a heroic student because his mother was just so proud and wanted his father to be proud too. But he'd mistakenly thought that he was nobody in the class. After all, who would pay much positive attention to the quirkless heroic student? So he didn't even bother considering the fact that Izuku's teachers would notice an absentee student on a Monday, because they'd never noticed at his other school, and they'd certainly never cared. And maybe the excuse of him not feeling well could have worked, had he not taken Izuku's cell phone, turned it off, and shoved it in the locked drawer in the kitchen. Because Izuku knew his teachers would send him messages asking if he was okay, and when they didn't get a response, they'd worry. If a strange man answered the house phone when he'd blatantly told them his mother was essentially single, that only set off more alarm bells. And Izuku was certain they'd come back for him. The only hitch in his plan was his mother. He needed to make sure she was safe, but he had no way of getting out of his room right now, without busting the door down. The handle Hisashi had changed didn't even have a keyhole on this side, and the deadbolt was pretty freaking hard to slip a credit card through. His window was bolted shut, made of a bulletproof glass, something Hisashi had insisted upon years ago, citing the bad neighborhood. This was annoying, really. But again, Izuku had planned for this. It's why he downloaded a new app onto his phone on the way home from school on Friday. It allowed him to send a text on a timer, even when his phone was out of commission. He'd honestly half expected Hisashi to destroy the thing. He glanced at his alarm clock. It was on Monday afternoon, and he was certain his teachers were concerned now. School had gotten out 10 minutes ago, which meant his text out would go out in 5. He smirked. Hisashi wouldn't know what hit him. He waited another 5 minutes after the text went out before sitting by his window. It was only 10 minutes after that he saw a worried ectoplasm standing in a tree outside said windows. He smiled when he saw him, and the teacher looked relieved, until Izuku held up the sign he'd written. Windows bolted shut, doors locked from the outside. Before you do anything, please take my mother somewhere safe. She's in danger. Ectoplasm's gaze became sharp and serious as he nodded and then vanished from view. A clone then, likely, sent to check up on him. That meant ectoplasm was still at UA with the other teachers who now had been alerted to the situation. Good. Now all Izuku had to do was wait. Aizawa Shota had woken up that morning with a headache. That was always a sign of a bad day. The last time he'd woken up with a headache had been the morning of the Yosuke incident, so he was already on edge. His gut was rolling, trying to tell him something was wrong, but he couldn't really tell what it was. Hisashi had insisted it was fine, and all of his cats were awake and healthy. That meant that it was likely something else that had happened later in the day. He took some extra precautions just in case. It wasn't until he started homeroom that he realized Midoriya was missing. The kid hadn't been so much as late once, let alone absent. He'd checked his phone the first chance he'd gotten, but there was no message from the kid. Nothing unusual on the news either, so if he'd gotten in trouble, it was the quiet kind, which was typically the more dangerous kind. At lunch, he'd asked the other staff members if they knew anything, but Nezu had worriedly confirmed that Midoriya hadn't set foot on campus since Friday. UA had homeschool days on Saturdays, which most students take as a 2-day weekend, though the extra day of rest doubled as a full day of training opportunities for the students who were more serious about heroics. It gave opportunities for non-hero course students to study under a teacher one-on-one, or in small groups depending on how many students wanted to join, using the faculties on campus. That way, if someone wanted to transfer her to heroics, they had the opportunity of the same sort of training as the current heroic students. UA did try to be fair to everyone after all. Midoriya had, thus far, used his Saturdays for training. The fact he hadn't shown up was concerning, but that they'd assumed that he'd taken the extra day to rest. He did work hard after all, and sometimes he ran the teachers into the ground. Perhaps that was their first mistake. Now it looked like Midoriya could be missing, and could possibly have been missing since Friday afternoon. But who would be able to kidnap Robin, of all people? Surely he would have found a way to contact them. For the briefest of moments, Shota had the sickening thought that he'd somehow been pulled into the past, that he'd never see the kid again, and that he was already gone. "Give it until after school," Nezu advised. "If we haven't heard from him then, we'll check on his house." Shota didn't like that course of action, but he nodded along anyways. His gut may have been rolling, but it was still in the something's going to happen sort of way, not in the someone you care about is in imminent danger kind of thing. The end of the school day didn't come fast enough. All of the staff members were twitchy and nervous, even All Might, who Shota thought hated the kid. "Any news?" Nezu asked, tail flicking in concern. "No. None of us have heard anything," Ectoplasm sighed. Just then, a notification pinged on the staff group chat, which they'd added Midoriya. "Robin. Hi, this is a timed message. If you're reading this, then my phone is temporarily out of commission. Sorry. If you're going to check up on me, then please come to my window, not the door. If you don't see me, then I'm probably in trouble. If that's the case, I swallowed a tracking device that Nezu-sensei can trace." They all stared at the message. A timed message, huh? Shota sighed. He knew something was up. His gaze flickered to Ectoplasm, who nodded. "My clone is already en route to the apartment we've got on file." "So now, what do we do? We wait?" Sashi scowled. "We need to find what we're getting ourselves into," All Might said. "Of course. For all we know, rushing into the apartment would cause more harm than good." Ectoplasm jolted suddenly, as he tended to do when the clone dispelled, and he was suddenly and unexpectedly barded with memories. "Well, shit just got more complicated," he sighed. "He's safe. Or at least, he's awake and unharmed, but his window is bolted shut, his door's locked from the outside, he's stuck in his bedroom. He also says his mother's in danger and we have to make sure she's safe." "Did he say anything else?" All Might asked. "Like what's going on?" "Hold on, my clone's still there," he explained. He didn't jolt this time. "He says that he'll explain in person after we rescue him. He actually requested that All Might come along." "Me?" Shota was just as surprised. Midoriya made it no secret that he disliked the #1 hero. "Yeah. He said it's just in case, because his captor has connections he'd rather not take chances with, or something like that." "Well then, our student's in trouble," Nezu grinned as he climbed on Shota's shoulder. "Now let's go on a rescue mission." "Ugh, I'm so bored," Izuku decided. "Being a prisoner sucks. It's so boring," he complained. Hisashi had taken out his computer while he'd been in school on Friday, so he wasn't allowed to alleviate his boredom there. He tried to kick him around a bit earlier, after Ectoplasm had left. Tried being the key word, because the worst he'd retained from said beating was some mild bruising. He didn't want to make the man suspicious by suddenly fighting back either. His teachers would come soon enough, and then he could spring his trap. Either way, Hisashi hit like a pussy, and Izuku was still bored. He didn't like waiting around for a rescue team, but it was better than busting out there and risking dragging civilians into this fiasco. If the heroes came to him, then they could help him if Hisashi decided to call in All for One as a backup. If Izuku broke out alone, then he'd be up against the villain equivalent of All Might and his merry band of misfits alone. While it wouldn't be the dumbest thing he'd ever done, he likes to think himself smarter than that. Besides, Aizawa would have his head if he put himself in harm's way without a decent backup plan. Izuku was honestly surprised that Hisashi hadn't kidnapped him yet. Not that he was complaining, mind you. Just, with a guy who wielded a warp quirk, it'd be far too easy to just whisk him away. He'd managed to do some research after the USJ. The League of Villains was just too convenient. They were a little too organized to be led by a child like Shigaraki. That meant someone else was pulling the strings. Someone who had a mind that looked to the future. A player. A chess player. Someone who was used to pulling the strings and content to sit back and let others have the spotlight. The criteria fit All for One perfectly. With a little hacking and background research, he managed to figure out a few interesting things regarding Shigaraki. His original name had been Shimura, not Shigaraki, and he'd accidentally murdered his family at a young age when his quirk came in. At least that's what the police assumed happened. The kid had never been found. Reports say he likely got scared and ran. He was jotted down as missing and lost into the system. 6 years later, however, a young boy matching that description of Shimura was spotted fleeing from the scene of a gruesome crime. A woman had her face disintegrated and choked to death on her own blood. Police had nearly caught him, but he'd somehow managed to escape into the shadows. It sounded a lot like Kurogiri's quirk. The connection Izuku found, however, was in the disappearance of the only police officer that had seen the kid. He'd vanished like he'd never existed in the first place. Similar disappearance had been tracked throughout the last 100 years or so, leading Izuku to believe that the man had a longevity quirk. But others claimed something far more terrifying. He could take other people's quirks as his own. After he'd heard that rumor years ago, he'd looked into those mysterious disappearances a little closer. They were all seemingly random at first. A cop here, a hero there, a civilian or two now and then. But the curious thing is, those investigations were shallow and short, like it was merely procedure rather than a true investigation. As if they weren't really trying to find those people, or solve the murders. In the rare occasions the body surfaced. He saw signs of memory alterations in a few cases. Some people who poked their nose where it didn't belong ended up going mad and killing themselves. Izuku quickly realized those cases were cover-ups, and there was one distinct connection between them all. Every single case file had been locked in the police records. There was nothing particularly high profile about these cases, nothing that would require them to be locked, but they were, and they were incorrectly marked as solved. That meant that nobody would snoop, even accidentally, unless that person was Robin, of course, because he always stuck his nose where it didn't belong. The only reason he thought to link those cases to All for One was the single case. The case that had been beyond locked. In fact, someone had tried to erase all traces of it in the system, and nearly succeeded. The cop had gone missing, only to turn up after 6 days. His escape was obviously an accident, as he was found dead in his home a week after his hospital release, supposedly from a suicide. The kicker, when he'd shown back up, his quirk, Airwalk, was gone. Izuku only knew one man who could make someone's quirk disappear so wholly. It really wasn't hard to figure out, especially when the man seemed perfectly sane just days before his suicide, not to mention the locked, nearly erased file, and the man had given one testament that Izuku was sure was the entire reason All for One had tried to erase the case entirely. He had white hair and evil eyes. I've never met a man so wholly powerful or evil in my life. He stole my quirk. That was all he had said before climbing up. Not that he blamed him. Izuku imagined that'd be traumatizing too, if he was born with a quirk that was suddenly taken away. There was a light rapping on his window, and he looked over to find Mama G and 13 there. He shot them a grin as Mama G quickly got to work on the windows. Somehow this scenario reminds me of Harry Potter. He silently mused to himself as he pried up loose floorboards and snatched the small snack shell. He hid it in his pocket as he heard someone knock at the front door. He raised an eyebrow at the two who were making quick work of the window as he heard Aizawa's voice carry down through the hallway. Ah, so he's the distraction, Izuku realized. Come on, 13 urged quietly as they silently opened the window. Izuku was quick to slip into Momoji's grasp as they quickly climbed down the tree. Alright, Eraserhead, we've got him, they explained through the earpiece. Izuku smirked as he heard the commotion from his apartment, only wincing lightly when he was set down on the ground. Damn, it was bright outside. Are you hurt? 13 asked, noticing the wince. Just some bruising, nothing major. He hits like a wuss. Mostly it's just bright. Momoji snorted lightly and took his jab while 13 shot the other hero a dirty look. We're glad you're safe, sharpshooter, Snipe stated from his perch on the tree. Wow, did everyone come? I'm flattered. He gave them an easy smirk, even as he kept a sharp eye out for trouble. What? You really thought we wouldn't? 13 sounded hurt. Just not used to it is all. He sheepishly rubbed the back of his head. Here is the first place I've had in this area that cared enough to treat me like a person, let alone even notice I was gone. I'm glad I was right in thinking you guys were different. He flashed them a grin. Eraserhead's got them in custody, Momoji announced. Izuku grinned. I've been waiting for this for a long time. Sure you have, Nezu said as he climbed onto his shoulder. He scratched the principal under his chin, and the little guy leaned into the touch. Several staff members gaped, leading him to believe that he was the only person Nezu allowed to do this. Though, I am curious. Why you hadn't done something about this sooner? I'll explain back at the school. He gave the mouse a meaningful look as he passed the satchel discreetly to him. I also have reason to believe that Hashi, the guy inside, not Yamada Hazashi, has connections to the League of Villains, which is why I asked him for All Might to come. I don't want to chance him for calling Korigiri's warp quirk or something. If that's the case, I'm glad we all decided to come, 13 shuddered. If Suzuku was being honest to himself, he expected things to go south at some point. The quietness unnerved him greatly. Was Hazashi lying? No, he'd already discounted the possibility when he discreetly asked his mother years ago for details of her dating his father. She'd had obvious signs of memory altercation, likely the result of a quirk. But people with quirks like that are regulated heavily and always logged into the system. There'd been an officer years ago, he remembered, that had gone missing. He'd had a memory-altering quirk. Izuku had found his files locked like the others. It was likely that All For One had altered his mother's memory then. He sat down in the chair in the meeting of the UA, with a cup of coffee and a sigh. Chiro was glaring at him, likely because she wanted to look at his injuries, but he'd insisted she waited until he was finished explaining. Alright, what's going on? Because you could have handled him easily, Aizawa started. Well, maybe this recording will explain? Izuku pulled out a flash drive he'd stashed. I recorded a conversation Hazashi had with me soon after I came back from the past. He'd been abusing me beforehand, but I was just a normal little kid at the time. I couldn't do anything, he explained, ignoring the grimaces of his friends. Nezu quickly plugged it into the computer and clicked the file Izuku instructed him to. Listen here, you little shit. Hazashi's voice filtered through the sound of rustling fabric. I don't have to listen to you anymore. I've got more than enough evidence. You talk to me or my mother again, and I'll make sure I'll send every hero in Japan. Police agency in Japan. Several teachers nodded as his younger self spoke. I assume the aforementioned evidence is this? Nezu asked, holding up the bag. That's the digital evidence, as well as some research I did. The photos, notes, and whatever else I could get hold of is stashed in the apartment, with several hard copies stashed throughout the city. Snipe whistled. Talk about prepared. Can't be too careful, Izuku replied. You make a single move against me, boy, and I'll not only make sure Inko ends up dead, but that you end up in a state worse than death. I've got connections. Your mother is safe. We've got several pairs of eyes on her as we speak, as well as several heroes on standby should anything happen, Nezu reassured. That's a relief, Izuku smiled. He didn't think he could handle losing his mother twice. Connections, huh? That makes two of us. That quirk really changed you, brat. Fine, you want to go against Severe? Listen here, I'm not your father. Aizawa pinched the bridge of his nose. This is going to get complicated fast, isn't it? You have no idea, Izuku groaned. Well, that's a relief. but I work for him. He gave me orders a decade ago to watch over his son and steer him away from the wrong path. So he's a villain, Ishii almost sighed. But the real question is, which villain? The one I suspect is pulling the strings of the League of Villains, Izuku answered swiftly, noting the way All Might and Nezu stiffened as if they knew who he was talking about. Interesting. Yeah, you've done a swell job of that. I get that you're frustrated, but could you maybe not taunt the guy with deadly connections? Kayama pleaded, looking concerned. I mean, I didn't know how deadly his connections were yet. Your father is a villain, boy, and he expects you to follow in his footsteps. Perhaps you've heard mention of his name? All for one. The room stilled. While many didn't know the villain was real or not, several had heard whispers of it, especially those who worked in the underground like Eraser had. You're All for One's son! All Might's eyes were wide. As far as I can tell, yes, Izuku nodded. I'll explain my research in a moment. So you do know, then. If I disappear, you'll go to his custody, and Inko will die. I've made sure of it. So, boy, you won't be sending in those files. Things will stay exactly how they are now. And the day you graduate high school, or the day I end up dead or arrested, you will become a villain under his careful tutelage. Do I make myself clear? Yes, sir. So, yeah, that's basically it. My bio dad is apparently the villain version of All Might. From the research I've done, he's got a quirk that allows him to steal the quirks of other people. I've compiled a list of approximately 62 quirks I'm sure he's stolen. And the dude's got connections. I found a missing persons file for no less than 120 civilians, 49 cops, and 237 heroes across the globe. All files were mysteriously locked. Out of all 451 known kidnappings, only 62 bodies were found. Of the 62, 12 were initially found alive, only to later go inexplicably insane and kill themselves later. All legal investigations were shallow cases were marked as solved in the systems. The teacher stared. I'm impressed by your research, Nezu spoke up. I figured it wouldn't be safe to do anything while I was still the quirkless nobody, so I wanted to wait until I was a student of UA. You're notoriously protective of your students, after all. He grinned at the mouse, who grinned back. Indeed. I feel I should explain, then. All Might sighed, shrinking down to his weakened form. Young Midoriya, do you remember how I showed you my injury? Yeah, you said you got in a villain fight 6 years ago, right? That's correct. The man lifted his shirt to show his scar again. It was a nasty one, but he'd seen worse before. I got this injury fighting All for One. He is what you might call my nemesis. So you're telling me that the man who nearly killed you is now after Robin? Aizawa glared at the hero. And you never thought to tell anyone that someone like that was alive? That he could target you at any time? I thought he was dead. I dealt him a heavy blow and assumed he died. I would have never taken this teaching position had I known he was still alive. I've got reason to believe he's Shigaraki's mentor, Izuku continued. And what led you to that conclusion? Nezu tilts his head. Well, All for One's original name, which was hard to find because he's been alive for well over a century and a half, and he's tried to completely bury all his personal files, is Shigaraki Kazo. Shigaraki Tomura doesn't legally exist. He's actually a kid who went missing after accidentally murdering his entire family with its quirk when it Queen Moonlight. Tomura's name is Shigaraki Tenko. All Might went deathly pale. Shimura? No, it couldn't. What's his grandmother's name? Nana? Yeah, Izuku nodded. I'm guessing she was someone you knew. Shimura Nana was my mentor. She died when I was a young teenager. All Might deflated as he spoke, a sullen expression taking over. Kayama put a hand on his shoulder to offer some comfort. It certainly makes sense why you played it safe, Ishiyama sighed, taking a long drink from his cup. Well, I had to think of my mother, too. Speaking of what, now, with Hisashi and Kale, we obviously can't go back to living in the apartment, Izuku hummed. Well, I've always toyed with the idea of a dorm system for the students. We could go ahead and make them, Nezu grinned. Until then, you and your mother can stay in the staff dorms on campus. UA is mostly the likeliest safe location for you, especially with the warp quirk or jammers we've added recently. Even Karagiri won't be able to get through them. Perfect, Izuku grinned. So all that's left is the sports festival and my provisional exam. He paused for a moment. Hey, what's the difference between a provisional license and the real thing? Nothing really, Aizawa spoke up. Think of a provisional one like a permit. The council will keep a closer eye on you during that time and keep track of any collateral damage you cause alongside your capture rate. After a few months, if all adds up well, or if you do something exceptionally heroic, you'll be granted the full license. And restrictions? Suku raised an eyebrow. It's only valid in Japan at this time. Nezu set down a cup of tea. There will be a senior hero listed on your provisional license should anything go horribly wrong, such as deaths caused by your inaction, mistreatment, or otherwise direct influences. The hero will take a major hit for you, and of course you'll use the license. So, I'm only able to take the exam if a hero vouches for me in the first place, Izuku realized. Under normal circumstances, I assume the class would fall under the jurisdiction of their teacher. That's correct, Nezu grinned. But something tells me otherwise, Izuku frowned. While you are Aizawa's princess, and thus we are able to practice as long as he's with you, I felt it would be unfair for him to sign up without permission. Nezu's tail flicked up as he spoke. So I took the liberty of signing you up under my name. You what? Snape choked. Do you have any idea how much attention that's gonna garner? I can't remember the last time you sponsored anyone. It's because I haven't sponsored anyone before, Nezu chuckled. So you put the spotlight on me. Izuku rolled his eyes fondly. I suppose I should thank you then. What better way of gaining publicity in such a short period of time than having Nezu, the principal of UA, vouch for me? Right, well, the sports festival is next week. Aizawa got things back on track. So Ectoplasm, Snipe, I will escort you back to the apartment to pack things. The faster you moved in here, the better. You can say that again, Izuku huffed. I'll go with Cementos to get your mother, 13 smiled. Mike's already keeping an eye on her. Thanks, you guys. I really appreciate all this. What are you thanking us for? Powerloader laughed. Robin, you're more than our student. You're our friend. Izuku felt his cheeks heat up a bit at that. It sounded nice. Even still, he accompanied the three heroes to pack his things. He couldn't help but feel edgy. Not once had he heard a thing from All for One. The way Hitsashi had always spoke about him made it sound like the guy could appear the moment trouble started. But it seemed like that wasn't the case. It wasn't a bluff. His research told him that much. So long as his mother was safe, though, he'd face whatever All for One threw at him. He was Robin, a hero. And honestly, after training and growing up under Batman and living in Gotham, he felt more than prepared. Not to say that he was expecting an easy fight, but at least he knew what to expect in a fight. For now, it seemed All for One hadn't heard this. Unlikely, or was taking a quiet approach to this. Izuku would take things one step at a time. The sports festival would come first, and Robin would be prepared. And that was chapter 10 of A Robin's Nest by SilvermistAnimeLover, Revenge. And that was, unfortunately, the very last chapter they posted, and it stopped updating, and its final update was in 2020. Thank you all for listening, and I'm not sure if I'll be able to post next week because I don't have any other fics lined up, but I will try to find something by then. See you all then. Bye-bye!